What's going on? I'm Tim Kelly of Section215.com, senior editor, content developer here, joined today by Jason Ferry, who is a staff writer at Section 215. Jason, what's going on, man?
Not much. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Well, great's a relative term, I guess you would say. I'm doing great that it's almost Christmas and I'm on break from college and done with finals. I'm not doing great in the sense that the Philadelphia Eagles have essentially, I don't want to say they've ended their season, because I think it's a very realistic possibility next week that the Colts beat the Cowboys. I don't know I'm not going to say I'm predicting that will happen, but it's very possible that Andrew Luck goes in there and torches that secondary, and that Mark Sanchez does enough to beat RG3 in the Redskins. It is RG3 again. And come week 17, whether it's Nick Foles playing, Mark Sanchez playing, the Eagles are able to edge out the Giants, which isn't going to be a give-me game like it once appeared with the way Odell Beckham's playing right now. But I think it's a realistic possibility that the Eagles still make the playoffs. It's just kind of gotten to the point where I don't want to say I don't care, but it almost feels like if the Eagles miss the playoffs, that sends some sort of message that a little something has to change this offseason. I don't want to give the vibe off as the overreactive Philly fan, but I also don't want the Eagles to get caught up in, we're ahead of the curve right now, let's just continue doing exactly what we've been doing that's gotten us here so far. You're ahead of the curve by hiring Chip Kelly when a lot of people questioned it, and now what's the next thing you're going to do to continue to stay ahead of the curve? And I don't know. Am I wrong for that, Jason?
No, I think you're right. As we go game by game, we're seeing, the holes in this team, and it seems like every week there's a new kind of glaring hole, especially this past month, and dropping, 3 games, all the good competition. It seems like every time we get matched up against a team who's known, as a strong team in the NFC, we kind of, lay an egg per se, and don't live up to the hype of the powerhouse that we have kind of gotten a reputation for since Chip Kelly has come here.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And a lot of people could just chalk it up as, well, Aaron Rodgers is having one of the best seasons we've seen a quarterback have. That's not going to happen every year. The Lions aren't going to have Ndamukong Suh next year. They're not going to be as good. The Seahawks, they're probably going to be around for quite a while, but that's just one team. Tony Romo's back's going to give out eventually. DeMarco Murray and Dez Bryant are both free agents. It just happens to be a rough year. But, I mean, I look around at all these teams with the exception of the Seahawks. And Russell Wilson, I have a love-hate relationship with him. I really personally cannot stand Russell Wilson, but I respect his game. I respect what he does on the field. I don't think he's simply just along for the ride, but I also don't think he's an elite quarterback either. So they're the exception, and they're what a lot of people think the Eagles need to do. Is they built that defense to be so strong. They didn't put much around them on offense for this season, especially after they traded Percy Harvin. The offensive line is not very good. They have a very good running game, so that does take some pressure off of him. But you look around at the other NFC teams that are serious competitors. Either they have one of two things. Either they have an elite defense like the Lions do, like the Seahawks do, or they're catching lightning in a bottle like the Cardinals are. That continues to amaze me. And the ones that I look at staying long term have loaded offenses with elite quarterbacks. Aaron Rodgers, an elite quarterback. Tony Romo has not necessarily had his best season of his career this year, but Tony Romo, especially last year and at times in his career, has played like an elite quarterback. The December reputation is certainly a very real thing. But when Tony Romo's playing well, Tony Romo, as much as we don't like to admit it in Philadelphia, Tony Romo is one of the better, not best, quarterbacks in the NFL. And when you surround that with Dez Bryant, Terrence Williams, Cole Beasley, Jason Witten, DeMarco Murray having an MVP type season, and one of the best offensive lines that the NFL has seen in 5 or 10 years, then that takes a lot of pressure off of Tony Romo. And it feels like what the Eagles are missing is that great aspect about their team. And you can try to build a great defense, but that's not necessarily an exact science, especially when it's not, like we found out in 2011, just about plugging whoever had the best seasons last year, sign them all to free agent contracts, and things are automatically work. A lot of it's about scheme. And, I mean, even guys like Darrelle Revis, they didn't feel would fit this defense. I think that's kind of faulty. He might not have been as good as he's been in New England, but Darrelle Revis is still better than Kerry Williams and Bradley Fletcher. Most people are. But I think it comes down to, if you want to have this long-term success, you can try and build that great defense. You can try and have just insane weapons around. But they already have pretty good weapons than they did last year. It kind of just feels like they need that elite quarterback.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And then obviously, like you were saying at the start, we have this inflow and outflow of teams each year that make the playoffs. Like look at the NFC South, for instance. I mean, every year it's somebody different coming out. And then, with the wild card, and you have a 10 or 11 win team that's going to miss the playoffs this year because of the structure. It's just insane. So, while I think the having an elite quarterback would help, I don't think there really is one in this draft. I mean, I'm not too high on Mariota. I think played against weak competition in the Pac-12, and we have to give up way too much for him. But I also think we have more deficiencies offensively than we would like to believe. Anytime you give Riley Cooper a multi-year contract, something's wrong. Riley Cooper, for all intents and purposes, has been the worst wide receiver in football this year. He doesn't get any yards after the catch. He doesn't have separation speed. He's dropped a lot of big balls this year. He's really only good as an edge blocker. And, for a time this year, we couldn't even utilize that because the line was so depleted that we couldn't even run a stretch play properly. So I think, we need some help at wide receiver. And, it's kind of unfortunate that we missed in this draft. And, Marcus Smith hasn't done anything. And you wonder what that pick could have been used for, especially with all the talent that came out. But I think we have a lot of deficiencies at wide receiver that won't necessarily be helping Foles or Sanchez. But I think the other problem with that is we can use somebody like Zach Ertz, like the Pats use Gronk.
Yeah.
If you want to split him out and use him because he's a big body, he is fast, and he has very good hands. So, and I would say with like 95% confidence, he's an upgrade from Riley Cooper. Even though he's a tight end, he's probably faster than Riley Cooper, if we're being honest. So I think we have a lot of deficiencies at wide receiver. I think we have deficiencies, obviously, in the middle now that Matthews is there. And then our secondary is just atrocious. And these elite quarterbacks, like Rodgers, he laughs at it. Because it doesn't matter the scheme that you're running defensively if your players aren't capable of handling that. And, that's what we've seen with recent performances, and especially against elite receivers and quarterbacks.
Yeah, I agree. That's a lot. I actually have a lot of reaction to that. Beginning with the Mariota thing, I am high on Mariota, and regardless of whether you're that high or not on Mariota, I think that there's certain teams, like if Marcus Mariota goes to Tampa Bay, which is a very realistic possibility, I have no clue how well it's going to work out because you don't have the offensive mind there, at least at this very moment, that's going to make that work. So you need to do something different. If Marcus Mariota goes to New York and Mark Helfrich becomes the coach there, or if Marcus Mariota, or if, that's just forget that example. But if Marcus Mariota were to go to New York with someone like Helfrich or with someone that utilized him, then I think Marcus Mariota can be a very effective quarterback. I do not buy the argument that just because RG3 got hurt and Cam Newton hasn't been great, that means every dual threat quarterback can't win a Super Bowl. I think that that's wrong, and I think as long as more teams trend back towards going for pocket quarterbacks, having a mobile quarterback isn't necessarily a bad thing. The problem with Mariota, it's pretty simple, though. It's not even I'm so scared of what the Eagles would have to give up, and I am, and I'll get to that in a minute. But it is literally impossible for the Eagles to get to a point where they could pick Marcus Mariota. The Eagles are in NFL purgatory if they want to have a top 5 pick, because they are going to be in the low, they're going to be somewhere in the 20s. I have no idea. A few weeks ago, it seemed like they were going to be in the bottom half of the 20s. Now they might be in the lower 20s. It really doesn't matter when it comes down to it. Realistically, Eagles fans need to hope that Marcus Mariota gets arrested before the draft if they want to have a chance to go get Marcus Mariota, because him falling drastically or having a bad combine, we need a lot to break for Marcus Mariota to fall. And I'd take him if he does fall, but I don't think that's going to happen. So we need to get that pipe dream out of our head. I think Nick Foles is going to be the quarterback here next year, no matter what, which I'll get to that a little bit later in the video. Another thing you said is you were talking about a lot of the deficiencies that the Eagles have. Obviously, the secondary is a deficiency. The wide receiving area, I mean, you have Jeremy Maclin, who they have to resign. Jordan Matthews is going to be a nice piece, likely going to move to the outside at some point, I would think, because I can't imagine that the Eagles are going to find a better outside wide receiver anywhere else unless they use yet another draft pick on that. I think Josh Huff is going to be, he shows flashes of being electric. I think Josh Huff has a chance to be special, but it'd sure be nice. A lot of people were worried about, oh, well, if you have Deshaun and Maclin and you have two small guys, no possession receiver, well, now you just have Riley Cooper taking up space. So I'd take my chances with Deshaun Jackson. I would have taken my chances trading that 27th pick, trading that second-round pick that ended up being Jordan Matthews. So essentially you're trading Jordan Matthews and Marcus Smith to go get Odell Beckham. I would not have had any issue giving the Giants those two picks, even if they made good on them and took Bradley Roby and Jordan Matthews, and both those picks ended up helping them. Odell Beckham looks like he's going to be a top 5 receiver, and an electric receiving class as Mike Evans, Sammy Watkins, Jordan Matthews, Mike Brown, or not Mike Brown, John Brown. Mike Brown's the Ferguson guy. John Brown. If you had a guy like John Brown in this offense that could blow the top off of things, I think you'd be in an even better situation. So, I mean, I look around at that Marcus Smith pick, and I would love to think that the Eagles know what they're doing, and in 2 years Marcus Smith is going to be this great pass rusher, but I can't, if he can't even get on the field for most of his first season, I can't imagine he's going to have this much of a turnaround for the next 2 seasons. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm extremely wrong about that. The other thing is, not only do we have these deficiencies that we currently have with the wide receivers, with the secondary, there's still parts of the linebacking core that you can never have too much depth, as we've learned this season, at the linebacking spot. And I think DeMeco Ryans is probably done for all intents and purposes for his career, for his Eagles career. The other thing is you have spots that are currently positives that have older players playing at them. I'm not looking at running back. I don't know how much LeSean McCoy has left in the tank. I like Chris Polk quite a bit. I think you can find a running back that's going to work in this Chip Kelly offense. You can find a lot of pieces that are going to work in this Chip Kelly offense. What you cannot find is a running game that's going to work behind an offensive line that isn't good, which we saw early in the season. And my concern is that if you traded all these picks up to get someone like Mariota, or if the Eagles have another draft where they use another first or second round pick on a wide receiver, or they go straight defensive, is that in a few years you're going to have Evan Mathis gone because he's not necessarily happy with his contract, and he's 32, 33 years old. Jason Peters is 32 years old. Todd Herremans, I think, is probably done. I'm not sure if Andrew Gardner's a long-term solution. Jason Kelce and Lane Johnson are top. I mean, Jason Kelce might be the best center in the league, and Lane Johnson is one of the better run-blocking tackles that I've seen in terms of his first 2 years in the league in a long time. So you have those two positions solidified, but you need to figure out the rest. And At some point, you might have to spend a higher draft pick to do that as well. So the Eagles, talking about staying ahead of the curve, not only do they need to fix the current issues on the team, but to remain good, it doesn't matter if you have a good secondary and if you have a good wide receivers. If you don't have a good enough quarterback and you don't have an offensive line that's going to be able to support that quarterback, or the running back, regardless if it's LaShawn McCoy or even further past when he's done, you're in trouble.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're learning, and it's unfortunate that we are learning, is because we all live by this notion that you or I could show up and play out the quarterback position for Chip Kelly. Well, it's not the reality of the situation, and unfortunately, we're figuring it out in a difficult way, dropping 3 key games down the stretch. So I agree that we do need somebody who can come in and fill that role. I, like you, think Nick Foles is going to be here next year. I'm not too high on Nick Foles, but I'm also not high on. While I'm not high on Mariota, I'm not high on trading up for him because, as you said, it is unrealistic. And then if you actually think about the package that you would have to give up, it's just unbelievable. I mean, Washington had a high pick that they were able to couple in there. So if you factor that and then drop all the way back into the 20s, it just becomes so unrealistic that, I mean, I want Philadelphia fans to stop expecting him to be here and just rationalize with the fact that we're probably going to have Nick Foles for another year. Let me ask you a question, all right?
Okay.
So, from what I heard today, they said Foles is out probably through week 17. Let's say Sanchez plays well the next 2 games. The Colts beat the Cowboys and we slip into the playoffs. Do you still play a rusty Nick Foles if you're going up against a team in the playoffs?
Well, did it say he's out through week 17? I've worked a lot of it. I didn't read the exact report in its entirety yet. Did it say he's out through week 17?
I bet in all likelihood he would be, but
Yeah.
who knows? I'm assuming he will be.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a lot easier if you could come back and have him play against the Giants week 17. But even in that scenario, the Giants is a losable game. I just think, does it really matter if the Eagles win a playoff game this year at this point? Because they're not doing anything if they win. If Mark Sanchez wins a playoff game, if Mark Sanchez gets them to the playoffs, it doesn't matter. Mark Sanchez isn't coming back this year. You don't have your long-term answer at quarterback. But at the same time, if Nick Foles comes back for a playoff game and is putrid, then that makes him look even worse in the eyes of the fan base. I look at Nick Foles as, he's certainly not. I think he's a much better quarterback than what he showed the first half of the season, and I don't think he's as good as what he was last year. The problem is you need to find a mix in between that, and I think he's closer to being the quarterback last year, and I still think you can do a lot more with him. The problem with Mark Sanchez is if you have to play your backup quarterback as much as you play your starting quarterback in a season, you're probably not going to make the playoffs. And the Eagles have had to almost, if Mark Sanchez plays through the end of the season, I think he'll have played more games than Nick Foles this year. And I don't want to say he's done a good job, but he hasn't done a bad job. If you expect your backup quarterback to go in and beat a Seattle team with an all-time great defense, beat an all-time great quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, and beat a very formidable Pack or Cowboys team, it's probably not all that realistic. But I mean, I guess getting back to your question, yeah, I think I would go with Nick Foles because Nick Foles is your guy next season. There is, we can agree, right, that there's no chance Mark Sanchez is back here next year.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I was actually pondering today, who would pick him out? I mean, I think the only way he's back here is as a backup again. But, I feel like somebody could get suckered into having Mark Sanchez as their quarterback and just having him as a stopgap for somebody they're looking for in the draft.
Well, and I'll get to that in 1 second. So I think as long as we know Mark Sanchez isn't going to come back next year and we think Nick Foles, I think there's no scenario where Nick Foles isn't on the team next year. Whether they draft somebody and try and groom him to play quarterback, I have no idea. But I think Nick Foles is going to be back next year. And if he's physically capable, you're not going to rush him out there. If Nick Foles is a bad questionable, then you play Mark Sanchez and you live with the end result. And then that's that. As far as who's going to pick up Sanchez, a few weeks ago, I kept saying this to myself. People used to say about Vince Young, oh, I can't believe Vince Young is a backup quarterback. He's one of the best 32 quarterbacks in the game, which was not even true. Vince Young is literally one of the worst quarterbacks that has ever played in the Eagles uniform. And I think that was shown by the fact that he blew 2 more opportunities after. Mark Sanchez is one of the best 32 quarterbacks in the NFL, but the last 2 weeks we've seen kind of the issues that Mark Sanchez has had with his overthrows, with his inaccuracy, and it's just, I kind of think, especially the way people are rushing quarterbacks in today, I don't even think someone's going to say, well, let's just have Mark Sanchez here for a year or two, wait for someone to play. I don't even know if you can sell that to your fan base. It doesn't matter to me, really, because Mark Sanchez is not going to be playing quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles next year. In a perfect world, Mark Sanchez goes to the Redskins or somewhere else that the Eagles are going to benefit if he doesn't play well. And the other thing to think about is he's not playing in Chip Kelly's offense. He's been very limited in what he can even do in this type of offense. I respect the guy. He's much better than what he showed in New York. They screwed him there. I get that. But he's a backup quarterback, and he's a good backup quarterback, but he's really nothing more than a good backup quarterback when it comes down to it. And if somebody else wants to make him their starter for a year or so, so be it, as long as it's not in Philadelphia, because it took them till the middle of the second quarter to even attempt a pass in the pocket last night. Mark Sanchez rolling out, and he hasn't even been as good at this the last 2 weeks. He's a relatively effective weapon. The 2 problems with him are eventually teams keyed in on that, were able to just gear for the run and readjust if he did that, or they were able to stop him outside, and he never runs. He never holds on to the ball on the read option or when he rolls out. So, he doesn't even keep the defense honest. And if you don't complete passes inside the pocket in the NFL, you can't win football games. That's the one thing Nick Foles could do. He might not be mobile like everyone else wants in Chip Kelly's offense, and it would be nice to have someone that could open up the playbook. But the Nick Foles interceptions, and we might as well just turn this over to the Nick Foles, Mark Sanchez discussion for a little. The Nick Foles, you could complete passes in the pocket with, and the interceptions he was throwing were downfield. They were making an attempt for an open receiver, and he just made a bad throw. Some of these Mark Sanchez interceptions, and again, I'm not someone here to just rant on Sanchez and bring up the butt fumble and everything like that. But some of these are just so... That one for Zach Ertz last night was one of the worst throws I've ever seen an NFL quarterback make. This is someone that's 28 years old. He's not a rookie. And, I guess we're just seeing those limitations. So I think we can put to bed the idea that we have 2 quarterbacks here, and neither of them are good enough, and just who cares who starts. Now, Nick Foles might not be the quarterback that's going to win this team a Super Bowl. In all likelihood, he's not. But he is way better than Mark Sanchez.
Yeah, and even from, a raw potential standpoint, it's just, what you're getting with Mark Sanchez, and while you're right, he got screwed in New York, we still knew his skill set and his capability, especially when you watched him at USC, and then you saw him, take a Jets team that wasn't very skilled offensively to a couple of AFC championships. So, if you're looking for a skill set even to build on for the future, there's no way it's Sanchez. It has to be Foles. The only thing that ever bothers me with Foles is his footwork. Just too many back foot throws. That's probably my biggest pet peeve with him. But when he steps into a ball, for instance, the ball he threw to Jeremy Maclin against the Texans, one of the best balls I've ever seen him throw because he's a big body quarterback, big frame, and when he steps through the ball, he really has a better arm than people give him credit for. So I think he's the quarterback going into next year. And I think, Chip is very savvy when it comes to, not only understanding the offensive game plan, but he's able to mold players into the player that they're capable of being. I think, if any coach is going to give Nick Foles the best chance to become and reach his ceiling, it's going to be Chip Kelly. And if it's a footwork issue compared to, an arm strength issue at this point, footwork is a lot more fixable than an arm strength issue. Your arm strength is what it is. So at least it's something to work on in the future. I think that's kind of been his, detriment this year so far has been some of his footwork and just leading to sloppy decisions or an underthrown ball. But at the same time, I wonder what the correlation between his back foot throws were to the offensive line not being there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's actually a good segue into my next point because and Mark Sanchez has made some disgustingly bad throws off of his front foot. That interception against the Titans where he stepped up in the pocket, and fortunately it didn't end up hurting them in the game. But he stepped up in the pocket, and instead of just kind of falling down, taking the sack, people get on Tony Romo and Peyton Manning for doing that. And it's just like you live to see another play. You live to see another down when you do that instead of just hurling it up like Sanchez did, like Johnny Manziel did. Just because you're able to step up in the pocket and evade a sack does not mean you need to throw the ball. But, I mean, regardless of that, I'll clear myself with Mark Sanchez in just a minute because we're in agreement. I think just about any level-headed person is. Mark Sanchez is probably not as good as Nick Foles, and he's not going to be here next year. So whatever happens the remainder of the season happens, and we'll live with the end result there. The thing about Nick Foles that I want to point out, which is the last thing I want to say about Mark Sanchez's numbers and Nick Foles' numbers this season are actually pretty similar. Obviously, last season wasn't, but I think it's become clear Nick Foles is not that quarterback. He's not that good. Whether he can be somewhat like that, we'll see. But the thing about Mark Sanchez, like you said, Mark Sanchez has played behind a healthy offensive line for the most part. Todd Herremans has been gone. He's played behind, and Mark Sanchez played like a half game without Evan Mathis. But for the most part, he's played behind that. He's played behind LaShawn McCoy, having a little bit better. He's not obviously doing what we expect LaShawn McCoy to do, and he's still a top 5 rusher this year. But he's played much better with Mark Sanchez in there than he did with Nick Foles. I think once you get a healthy offensive line back around Nick Foles, you take some pressure off of him with the running game. Nick Foles did have Darren Sproles as a very effective weapon, which he has not been as much the second half of the season. Nick Foles did have that earlier in the season, so he had that going for him. But to get LaShawn McCoy back and to have a healthy offensive line, I think the backpedaling and the back foot throws and everything, they go away. I just think there's sometimes where I watch Nick Foles where he just backpedals and it's like, just get to the right. Don't backpedal, roll out to the right and throw the ball away so there's no intentional grounding. There's nothing like that. And just live to see another down. I think that's the biggest problem with both of these guys is they don't know how to say, okay, it's 2nd and 6. I don't need to complete the pass here, but I really can't lose yardage and put us in a 3rd and long situation. So I can't take a sack. I can't backpedal and take a sack. I can't backpedal and make a lame-ass attempt as I'm getting sacked to throw the ball and end up getting an intentional grounding penalty. I can't put an offensive lineman in a position to get a holding call. I need to roll out and get rid of the ball. Mark Sanchez should be able to do that because he's a little bit more athletic than Nick Foles. Nick Foles, I know you can't teach athleticism, but he also is in the NFL, and I think he can roll out and get rid of the ball. I don't think he needs to roll out and duck 5 defenders and try and run for the first down like he's Colin Kaepernick. Not that Colin Kaepernick's good anymore, but I think that there is some learning with Nick Foles still to happen, and I wouldn't be surprised if Nick Foles came back next season and had a good enough season that we look at him and say, well, maybe if we continue to surround the defense with pieces, continue to get him weapons, maybe we can win with them. The Eagles are limited in what they can do. They're not going to be a dynasty. And save this. Save this audio. I hope I'm wrong. I hope in 5 years I can look back and laugh at this. But it's probably going to be a one-time thing if the Eagles win the Super Bowl under Chip Kelly, because they're probably never going to have a good enough quarterback that you can say annually we're going to be in a position to go win a Super Bowl. Probably not going to happen. But I don't know. I think there still is a scenario where you have Nick Foles and LaShawn McCoy has a great year, or whoever's running back. You have a very good offensive line. You surround him with the right weapons, and the defense takes enough of a step forward that maybe you can get hot one year going in the playoffs.
Yeah, and if you look at it last year, really, Nick did everything he could in that game against the Saints to put them in the position to win. It was really the defense that kind of let us down. While throwing around the term franchise quarterback isn't my thing to do, I think there are so few true franchise quarterbacks.
I agree.
He had the franchise quarterback drive. He took you down the field. He drove you whatever amount of yardage you needed to have, whether it was a field goal or a touchdown. And at that time, all we needed was the field goal to take the lead. He was able to do that. So that's one of the positive signs, and I've actually talked about it before with other people, is when he makes his mistakes, they're normally early in the game, and he then settles down. So he's not making these terrible mistakes like Sanchez has, where it's late in the game, you turn the ball over, and then you give your opponent the last 6 minutes to just run the clock out. He's making his mistakes early on in the first half, where he has time to rebound and figure it out. He doesn't put his team in this, insurmountable hole, let's call it. Like, for instance, obviously the Jacksonville game, he was horrendous in that first half. And while they were in a hole, he wasn't making mistakes in the second half to allow the opponent to kind of just run that clock out, which, I don't think there's any significance to, when his turnovers are happening. I just think he figures it out later in games.
Yeah.
I think he has a better understanding as the game goes on. I think Chip helps him with that as well, where, Mark has really just struggled with that throughout his career, being sporadic with turnovers.
Yeah. I think Chip Kelly actually likes Nick Foles a lot. I think if it had come down to this week, Nick Foles is 100% clean bill of health. Mark Sanchez has played awfully last 2 weeks. Who starts? I think undoubtedly Nick Foles is starting quarterback, because I think Chip, in a sense, when he made that statement a few weeks ago where he got really upset about the report that Howie Roseman and a few other people in the front office had soured on Nick Foles, it seemed genuine to me. Maybe I'm reading too far into that, but I think Chip is higher on Nick Foles than we think. And the one thing that keeps coming into my head is, what if Nick Foles, are we going to look back in 15 years when I'm talking to my son about the Eagles, and hopefully I'll have kids by then, when I'm talking to my son about the Eagles and he's asking about Eagles history and games that I've watched, and he says, wow, Nick Foles, this guy had 27 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. What happened? And my answer would be, well, he had one bad half of a season and then got injured and then never got another opportunity again. He would probably reply, and he wouldn't be living in the moment, but he would reply, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense to give up on someone for one bad half of a season, does it? And I probably wouldn't have a great answer to that, except you had to be there. But I mean, that's just, I think that's one angle that it's worth looking at it as many mistakes as he made. It was only half of the season.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And, a lot of times, especially as a fan base who demands winning now, we fall prisoner of the moment. And anybody can have a bad small sample. Look what Tom Brady did up until that Chiefs game. People were asking if he was done, and then now look what he's doing. So anybody can have a bad stretch. people were giving Shady a hard time when he struggled earlier in the year. Is he done? Is it time to move on? Players go through these droughts where it seems like nothing can go right, and that ball gets tipped, and then the defender picks it off, so your interceptions inflate. So I think what Nick is what you said earlier. He's a combination of what we saw last year and what we saw this year. And I think that's what he's going to be. And I really hope that he gets another shot. And because I believe he can be like a 15th and up, maybe like a 15th to 12th best quarterback in the league. And I think that's where he'll fall. But like you, I don't want to say that, he had a great year, then he got injured, and we never saw him again because it just doesn't seem right.
No, and I agree with your side. I think he easily could be a 12th to 15th best quarterback, and that may very well be his ceiling. The problem is his floor might be lower than that. Maybe this wasn't a fluke this first half of the season. The good news is we're probably going to get another season to see, and that's kind of why I hope the Eagles don't take a quarterback next year or in this year's draft. I know you're kind of putting your franchise in a holding pattern, but there's not really a quarterback that I look at and say, I like Bryce Petty, I like some of these guys, I like Brett Hundley, but I don't love any of these guys. I don't think that they're slam dunks to be better than someone that we're saying this guy could be one of the top half of the quarterbacks in the league. He could be in that discussion. You need to know that when you're drafting a quarterback, because the next quarterback that's taken, we'll give Matt Barkley a wash, but the next quarterback that's taken may very well decide the fate of the Chip Kelly era, and that's not something you want to just say, well, it looks like we need a quarterback, so whoever's on the board at 20 whatever, that's who we're going to take, or whoever's in the area, if Jameis Winston falls, we're just going to take that quarterback. Not that I wouldn't consider that idea, but you need to be 110% sure, because the Eagles needed a quarterback badly 2 years ago, and people wanted them to take Geno Smith in the top 5. And had that happen, Chip Kelly would probably not have a job at this point. Neither would Howie Roseman. So you need to know whatever quarterback you take next is the guy that's going to be your franchise guy. And I don't want to sound scared. I don't want to sound like the people that said, well, you can't fire Andy Reid because you don't know if you're going to find a better coach. But you need to hit a home run on the next quarterback selection. And until you're sure you can do that, we have someone here in Nick Foles who is at least worth another look in my mind. Now, the final thing I want to get to, and you feel free to disagree with me on this, Jason, but Chip Kelly for a long time, really actually, for a year and 10 games, felt like a new toy. This offense was the envy of the NFL. I would wake up thinking, how did we get so lucky to have this in Philadelphia? We don't get these type of nice things in Philadelphia. How did this happen? And I understand that he didn't choose the quarterback situation. Nick Foles, he inherited, and he's had success here, which is a good thing, and that may keep him ultimately from finding that franchise quarterback, top 5 quarterback, whatever you want to label it, to ultimately put this team over the top. And a lot of it has to do with the Marcus Smith selection, but you look at the 2 drafts that they've had in the Chip Kelly era, and they just really have not been that productive. Last year's draft looked great at first. Lane Johnson's a good pick in the top 5. Forget the PED suspension. Lane Johnson has produced since he's been here. He's been the best out of the 3 offensive linemen taken in the top 5. But Zach Ertz, last year, Zach Ertz was a great pick. This year, it's like, he's the second string tight end. And it's not because he got hurt or anything. It's because Chip's not using him. Chip's not utilizing him. So that's kind of a strike against Chip. And you go down this year's draft, you have the first round pick Marcus Smith, who's been inactive for a good amount of the season. Even when he's been active, he's been all but inactive. You have Jordan Matthews, who has been a good pick. I can't complain about Jordan Matthews one bit. But then you look at Josh Huff, who's made his mistakes. We'll see what he ultimately turns into. Brandon Bear might have been a good pick, but you look at guys like Jalen Watkins, hasn't been on the field this year. And I don't know. It kind of feels like the magic the new toy feel has kind of worn off on Chip in my mind.
Yeah, it has its moments. Where we rattled off 24 straight last night, I was like, oh, like, this is the capability of it. Like, it's back. We got it.
Yeah.
But then you fall into these points like the San Francisco game where we didn't cross midfield until the latter half of the fourth quarter. It might have been the last drive, actually. And you're just like, well, what the hell is going on? Like, where is this offensive guru that we brought in? And, like, it just didn't have that feeling, that new toy feeling. And, it has its moments. Like, there are times where, we'll come out and we'll throw the ball 3 straight times and we'll go 3 and out real fast. Or we'll run the ball and three straight times, no yardage. And you just kind of wonder sometimes, like, are teams catching on to the play cycle itself of what Chip's going to run? Because if you're running, let's say, he has a package basically of 6 running plays. Mm-hmm. You figure teams are going to eventually know when and where that's coming from.
And you know what play they know exactly every time, and I'll let you finish. They know the fake screen to one side, throw to Riley Cooper on the other side that they attempt 4 times every game. I swear to God, I cannot watch that play once more because it was great at first, but teams know this is coming. I have not seen it work once in the second half of this season.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I'm waiting for the moment where that route gets jumped.
Yeah.
Because if you do that against, let's say, Seattle, Richard Sherman, Cam Chancellor, Earl Thomas, those are, if you have an intelligent secondary, or, even if you, let's say, it could even be Clay Matthews. If he sees a design like that and he sees the pump or he recognizes the formation, he's going to jump that route. And it's either going to be a dead play where you're spiking the ball at the running back's feet, it's a win for them, or he's going to jump that route, and that's another win for them. So it's a lot like when Andy Reid used to run the shovel pass.
Or throw to Deshaun Jackson 90 yards down the field to start the game every game.
Yeah, eventually you catch on to the cool plays that are everybody's like, oh, where'd this come from? Like, it becomes a trend, and you start to pick it up. It's similar to a lot of teams with the bubble screens now. Mm-hmm. It's easier to pick up because you recognize the formation and the package and even the personnel coming onto the field when you're running it. But it loses its new toy, aspect now and then there's other times. It's like Christmas. Some days you wake up and these guys come out and they put up 24 like they did, and it feels like Christmas morning. And then you have games like against the 49ers, and it's just like you don't even know what to say. It's just the ugliest thing you've ever seen.
Yeah, and there are going to be bad games, and the 49ers are a good defense. I really wish they could have played the 49ers second half of the year when they self-destructed, because that might have been a different game. But you can also say they could have played the Rams second half of the year, which very well could have been a loss. So you take your games where you get them, I guess. The thing I feel like is, and they've talked about being risk takers in this organization, that's Jeffrey Lurie's words, and ahead of the curve has been a term used a lot for this team. I don't want to say that this is a stone cold thing that I want to see happen. I'm just bringing up the idea. This offseason, you decide, well, Howie Roseman, I don't know if the report was true or not about him and Chip not liking each other, but you let go of Howie Roseman and you decide. Wait, who's the president that's getting the GM looks? His name's slipping my mind right now.